Hello and welcome to another episode of Changing Aspen. I'm your host, Aspen, and today we are going to be discussing Mormons and aliens. I grew up Mormon, but I didn't grow up as a member of the Latter-day Saint Church. I grew up in a fundamentalist sect called the Church of Christ. My grandfather is the one who founded this group. His name is Bruce Wakeham, also known as John Morgan Peacemaker, but throughout these episodes, I'm simply going to be referring to him as Bruce. Bruce passed away before I was born, so I can't ask him to validate the story that I'm about to tell. But the story that I have for you guys is that when I was young, I was shown the film Fire in the Sky, which is the Hollywood adaptation of Travis Walton's book, The Walton Experience, which relays his story of being abducted by aliens in 1975. The incident occurred in Snowflake, Arizona, which was actually a town settled by Mormon pioneers, and at the time that he was living there, it was mostly populated by Latter-day Saints. Travis Walton and his wife were baptized as members of the Latter-day Saint Church, but they were not active churchgoers. And most of the residents of that town didn't actually know they were members, but a lot of his coworkers did assume that he was Mormon because he didn't drink or smoke. I'll expand on why I find those details relevant a bit later in this episode, but just keep that in mind. Walton has done a lot of interviews about his experience over the years. Most notably, he appeared on the Joe Rogan Experience about 4 years ago. He also had a documentary made about it, and I think that one was produced back in 2015. I have consumed a bit of that material so that I could understand his story a little bit better, but out of everything that I found, I haven't found anything that corroborates the story that I'm about to tell you guys, which is the story that my grandfather supposedly heard from Travis Walton himself. I do want to try and get a hold of Travis Walton so that I can talk to him about this. I just don't really know how to get a hold of somebody that is slightly famous. I'm still kind of working on that. In his book, The Walton Experience, he says that he was on his way home from a job site. He was part of a 7-man logging crew. And while they were driving home in their truck, they saw what Travis describes as a strange and unusually bright light coming from the sky, and it was shining through the trees. They drove their truck towards it so that they could figure out what this light was coming from. And as they made their way into this clearing, they saw hovering up in the sky what he describes as a flying saucer. Walton gets out of the truck and runs towards the saucer in an attempt to see it better and just see it more up close. And as he approaches it, he is suddenly blasted backwards by what he describes as a mysterious bolt of energy. His coworkers see his body land on the ground, and they assume that he's lifeless. So they flee the scene in fear and return to the town of Snowflake, Arizona, and tell the sheriff, which is a very unlikely story, that this man was abducted by aliens. And so for the next 5 days, which is how long Walton was gone for, they all became suspects of murder. Walton later claimed that he was taken aboard this UFO and examined by aliens, right? In an interview that he did in 2025, he said he thinks that the aliens didn't actually mean to abduct him, that was not their intention, and that they were not experimenting on him or torturing him in the way that the movie Fire in the Sky kind of depicts. He thinks that he was accidentally mortally wounded by the spacecraft, and they brought him on board to actually heal him, not torture him. Before my dad showed me the film, he made sure to tell me that the Hollywood adaptation was false, that this was not actually what happened, and the true story is the story that he heard from his father, my grandfather Bruce, who started this whole thing, that Bruce allegedly heard from Travis Walton himself. I was told that when Travis did make it onto this spacecraft, that he was healed by not aliens, but robots. And when the robots were finished healing him, they brought him to the cockpit of the spacecraft to meet the pilots, who were a man and a woman that he described as the most beautiful people he'd ever seen, like a type of beauty that did not exist on Earth. And that these two people were Adam and Eve from the Bible stories, the same Adam and Eve. I asked my dad if he believed this story that Bruce told him, and my dad's response was that Bruce told him the story in a way where like he told him the story as though it were true. And so my dad just kind of shrugged. I think he didn't want to actually say, yes, I believe that Adam and Eve were flying around in their spacecraft, so he put that all on his dad. But I was told that his dad was a prophet of God and had all kinds of revelations. And so when I hear this, I'm like, well, yeah, it's got to be true then, you know? Why would the prophet lie? How could the prophet be led astray? And so for a long time in my life, I did believe that Adam and Eve were out traveling in the universe in their flying saucer and occasionally picking people up, as what happened to Travis Walton. Obviously, this is something that I do not believe anymore. What I do believe is that my grandfather and potentially Walton listened a little bit too much to the ideas of a man named Ross LeBaron. Ross LeBaron is the brother of Orville LeBaron, also known as the Mormon Manson. My grandmother was raised by their brother Alma. So the LeBaron brothers are essentially my great step uncles, right? My grandfather, Bruce, joined their cult, the Church of the Firstborn of Fullness of Times, in 1958, shortly after his own excommunication from the Latter-day Saint Church. He became a member of their Quorum of the 12 and stayed with this group for about 14 years. When he joined the group, Joel LeBaron was the patriarch and the leader of this group. Here's a little bit more background information on that. When Joel claimed the mantle, his brother Ross, as well as a couple others, did not believe his claim that he was the prophet. And so Ross started his own group, which he simply called the Church of the Firstborn. Ross spent a lot of time in his backyard, which just happened to be in Arizona, building models of spacecrafts. His goal was to build a spacecraft large enough that he could fly to another planet, the planet that Jesus Christ is on, so that he could pick him up, and bring him back to Earth to fulfill the second coming. Ross believed that that is what his calling was. So, kind of an interesting intersection between my grandfather Bruce and Ross LeBaron is that they both believed that ancient biblical figures are traveling through the universe spreading the gospel, and that I don't know that Bruce believed this, but Ross believed that Jesus Christ is on another planet and that the second coming will be fulfilled by bringing him back on a spacecraft, right? Another intersection of Ross LeBaron and my grandfather's beliefs, other than what I've already stated, is something called the pure seed doctrine. Ross LeBaron Jr. was recently jailed for impregnating his own daughter, basically to strengthen the concentration of his own genes in the next generation. My dad, who is Bruce's son, is married to two of his half-sisters. Bruce also believed in this pure seed doctrine and justified the incest using the Peacemaker pamphlet, which states that intermarrying is acceptable when sanctioned by God, as was Abraham's marriage to his half-sister Sarah. Before his death, Bruce changed his name legally to John Morgan Peacemaker. I believe that he did this to reflect his beliefs in the Peacemaker pamphlet. I'm going to give you guys a breakdown of the history of that pamphlet in my next video. But for now, just understand these things, that they had intersections where their beliefs merged. I'm not sure that Travis Walton shared any of these beliefs or that he even ever actually met my grandfather. My grandfather may have just fucking lied the way that he did often. But here's what I can tell you about Travis Walton and his actually extensive Mormon lineage. And I'm reading word for word a excerpt from Travis Walton's book, The Walton Experience. He says, "Snowflake residents, I think, viewed me as an outsider. My moving to a town from elsewhere and my church inactivity contributed greatly to that impression. I never told anyone, but my Mormon roots were as deep as anyone's. They didn't know it, but going way back, I'm actually related to some of them. My great-great-grandfather, Joseph Walton, was among the pioneer families to settle the Utah Valley with Brigham Young. Joseph Walton helped build and lived in Wordsworth Fort in Alpine, Utah. He served under Captain Carlisle and Sergeant John Langston as a soldier in the Mormon Militia Company and later as a police officer. He saw a lot of trouble with Indian raids, including the Walker War and the Black Hawk War, and endured the same hardships as the other pioneers taming the Utah Valley. His son, my great grandfather, John James Walton, worked in Brigham Young's household to pay his way to becoming one of a small number in the very first graduating class of the Brigham Young Academy, later known as Brigham Young University. His wife also has extensive ancestry with the church, and her ancestors were one of the first people to settle Snowflake, Arizona, the town that the incident occurred in. He writes, "My wife Dana's great-grandparents, Smith D. Rogers and Eliza Snow Smith, were among the earliest settlers. Her grandfather, Wilford, was born in a log cabin here in 1888. Now, this is a very generalized statement and something that should definitely be taken with a grain of salt, but something my dad said to me when I was young is that if you can tell someone is Mormon, or if they tell you that they're Mormon, and they adhere to strict guidelines of the doctrine and things like the word of wisdom, but they don't go to church, they're very likely following the law of polygamy as well. Because fundamentalists believe that the teachings of the church are correct and they believe in its doctrine, but they also believe that the church apostatized from the restored gospel for essentially laying aside the doctrine of polygamy to live the law of the land. So a lot of fundamentalists do believe in teachings of the church like the word of wisdom and things like that, but when Wilford Woodruff told everyone to live the law of the land instead of continuing to live in polygamy, that's when the fundamentalists were created. That's why if you talk to fundamentalists, a very common phrase that they use is a higher law. That's what they always say when they're asked why they do illegal things like polygamy. When their own scriptures instruct them to live according to the law, they say, but we live according to a higher law. That's always what I hear. Now, once again, take all of that with a grain of salt. It does not mean that he was a polygamist just because he didn't go to church. But with his extensive Mormon ancestry and the strange story of flying saucers and the fact that he lived in Arizona, a state where both Ross LeBaron and my grandfather lived, and like their intersecting beliefs of UFOs and aliens, I do wonder whether or not he was a fundamentalist. And I also wonder how much communication he may have had with my grandfather, who very likely believed in the teachings, or some of the teachings, of Ross LeBaron. What do I think of all of these things now as an ex-fundamentalist? Well, I do not believe that Adam and Eve are going around flying in their spacecraft. I do believe in life beyond Earth, and I do believe that the various governments of Earth are aware of intelligent life on other planets, but they would never tell us about it. Why? Because our minds would expand in such a way that we no longer would identify ourselves as Americans or Russians or etc., as much as we would identify ourselves as the people of Earth. That kind of unification would take away a lot of their power and the powers that be, because they get their power from our division. And after watching Travis Walton's documentary, I am a little bit more convinced that he did have an extraterrestrial experience because of the accounts that can back it up, as well as the attempts from the government to quiet the witnesses and the perpetual dialogue that anyone who sees UFO or believes in abductions is mentally ill. It's called an ad hominem argument, but they attack the individual rather than discussing the data and the facts surrounding the experience of these individuals. That's another reason why I do think that there is extraterrestrial life and that there are people on Earth who have experienced it. Now, if anyone knows how I can get a hold of Travis Walton or has an idea of how I can get a hold of anybody that is, relatively famous, a lot of people haven't heard of him, but a lot of people have. But yeah, if you guys know how I can get a hold of him, let me know, because I would love to ask him a few questions about this if he's willing to talk about it. And also tell me in the comments what you guys think of Travis Walton's story, or if you've had any extraterrestrial experiences yourselves. Thank you. And be sure to join me for my next episode on Changing Aspen, where I discuss the history of the Peacemaker pamphlet, which had a lot to do with the cult that I grew up in. My grandfather even named himself after it. I'll go into the history of that. Yeah, and a few other things as well. Just join me next time. Thanks.